The movie opens in Philadelphia in 1961 when a woman gives birth in a department store. Soon, the doctor arrives and checks on the baby, who won't stop crying. To his shock, the baby has fractured his legs and arms in the womb. Many years later, David takes the train back to Philadelphia after a job interview in New York. When he sees a woman about to sit next to him, he removes his ring and hides it in his pocket. They chat about sports, and he mentions he's afraid of water and doesn't like football. He also tries flirting with her, but she politely declines, says she is married, and moves to another seat. Then David puts on the ring again. Suddenly, the train starts going faster, and everything shakes around David. David's son Joseph is watching TV at home, and the news show, a train that just derailed, is killing everyone inside. Panicking, David checks the notes to realize his dad is on that train. Moments later at the hospital, David wakes up and notices a person being operated on nearby before he's found by a doctor, who asks for his history. David explains he's never had any allergies or underlying conditions and is surprised to learn he's the only survivor from the accident. In fact, the doctor is amazed by David's lack of pain and injuries. Not even a single scratch. When David leaves the room, he finds his family waiting for him. Joseph tries to make David and his mom, Audrey, hold hands, but they quickly drop it. Later, at home, David tells Audrey that he doesn't think he got the job, but will move out soon anyway. It turns out they're separated and sleeping in different rooms. The next day, David attends the memorial service for the 177 deaths in the accident. After it's done, David returns to his car and finds an envelope with a card with the limited edition logo. When he opens it, he sees no names. It is just a note asking how many days he's been sick. Afterwards, David goes to work, which involves being the security guard for a football team. With the card still on his mind, he asks the secretary to check how many sick days he's had. Then he watches the team train with nostalgia in his eyes. At the end of the day, David is told by his boss that he's never had a single sick day since he took this job 5 years ago, so he's getting a raise. That night, David asks Audrey if she remembers him ever getting sick, because he doesn't. Audrey thinks about it and admits she can't recall a single day of seeing David sick since she met him in college. A flashback jumps to 1974, where the baby from before is now a teen. It turns out he has osteogenesis, which means all his bones are very fragile, and he often ends up breaking them. The boy is afraid of going outside and getting hurt again. Not to mention other kids at school call him Mr. Glass. To take him out of his isolation, his mother tells him she left a present for him outside. The boy gathers his strength and gets the gift, which happens to be a comic book. His mother explains he'll get another one each day he leaves the house. In the present, the boy has grown into an adult. His name is Elijah, and he has an art gallery dedicated to comic book art. He's very defensive of comics as an art form, and cancels a sale when the client wants to give a valuable painting to his 4-year-old. In the afternoon, David and Joseph come to see Elijah to ask about the card. Elijah explains he's David's health and is glad to hear he was never sick. However, Elijah did have an injury. In college, he was in a car accident that hurt his leg and made him quit football. Then Elijah explained that he had studied comic books and thought superheroes were based on old history. Because of his health condition, he's always wondered if someone else out there was the total opposite, meaning someone unbreakable. When Elijah heard David was the sole survivor of the train accident, he thought he could be the one. Joseph is excited about the possibility of his dad being a superhero. Still, David believes this is a weird scam, so he leaves with his son. That night, David reads about the accident in the newspaper, which inspires him to check his closet. He has a gun hidden there and a folder with newspaper clips related to his life. The first shows the start of his football career, and the last is the car accident. The vehicle is damaged, so the fact that he survived is a miracle. At that moment, he's interrupted by Audrey, who asks him if he's been with any other person. After David says he hasn't, Audrey admits she's been shaken by the train accident. She announces she would like to work on their relationship again because his survival signifies second chances. Sometime later, Elijah visits David while he's at work, telling him it was no coincidence that he chose security as his job because his instincts want him to protect people. While they walk near the line, David stops to look at a particular guy and thinks he'll leave before he can be patted down. Just as he predicted, the man soon walks away. Elijah wonders how David knew that guy was carrying a weapon, so David explains he got an image in his head showing him. In fact, he has a natural instinct to tell when someone has done something wrong. Elijah calls it his superpower, but David doesn't like where the conversation is going and asks him to leave. Before doing so, Elijah asks if someone else has been in the car accident, and David confirms Audrey has been there too. Afterwards, Elijah goes to his car and sees the supposedly armed man passing by. He starts to follow him and even asks him to wait, but the man ignores him. Considering his condition, Elijah tries to go as fast as he can, but he's still too slow. When the man goes down the subway station, Elijah pushes his body too far and falls, breaking multiple bones. As his cane breaks and he deals with the unbearable pain, he sees the man's jacket move and reveals the gun hiding underneath David's. After the match ends, David goes home and sees Joseph playing football. He scolds him for it, reminding him that Audrey hates the sport because of the injuries that it causes. Then David decides to do a little experiment and starts lifting weights. At first, it was just 250, the most he'd ever lifted. Joseph continues to add more and more weight with each attempt until they exhaust all the weight they have. Eager to expand their knowledge, they also incorporate some paint cans, and David ends up lifting 350 pounds with minimal effort. At the hospital, Elijah is informed that he has multiple fractures. Among them, the most severe are the 14 fractures in his leg, requiring him to undergo physical therapy. Subsequently, he participates in physiotherapy with Audrey. He takes the opportunity to inquire about her marriage under the guise of wanting to get to know his doctor better. During the conversation, he discovers that David's decision to quit football due to a car accident was a significant factor in bringing them together, as Audrey despises the sport and its associated injuries. While probing further, Elijah accidentally mentions David's name, leading Audrey to become suspicious. In another scenario, David positions himself amid a crowd during a match and experiences visions whenever someone jostles him. Initially, he only hears the voice of a shouting child. Still, he witnesses a man covertly retrieve something from the trash. Distrustful, David confronts the man, asking him to step out of the line for a search. Still, nothing incriminating is found in the man's pockets. David concludes that he has been deceived into believing he possesses superhuman abilities. David is summoned to the school because Joseph has been injured. The teacher recalls David from his time as a student there and recounts the story of a young David falling into a pool and remaining submerged for 5 minutes. Upon being pulled out, he was unresponsive until paramedics revived him. Consequently, the school revises its pool safety regulations, and the incident becomes an urban legend among David and the other children. This revelation further convinces David that he is not a superhero. Following their departure from the school, Joseph reveals that he got into a fight while protecting a girl being harassed because of her race, expressing his desire to be a hero like his father. Despite David's insistence that he is just a regular person, Joseph remains unconvinced. In the evening, Audrey discloses to David that Elijah has divulged everything. Before they can delve into the matter, they discover that Joseph has seized David's firearm and pointed it at him, attempting to prove that David is impervious to harm. After a moment of hesitation, Joseph relents, and David persuades him to put the firearm down. The next day, David visits Elijah, who confirms that the man from the stadium indeed had a gun. Elijah also believes that David did not sustain any injuries during the car accident. He hypothesizes that David fabricated the injury to end his football career and win Audrey's affection. David implores Elijah to cease troubling him and his family. He recounts how he contracted pneumonia as a child due to the near-drowning incident, which he believes should serve as sufficient evidence to dismiss the subject. Later, Elijah is found in a catatonic state at the comic book store. The store clerk attempts to close the shop and tries to move Elijah in his wheelchair. Still, Elijah deliberately disrupts the movement of the wheel. After several attempts, Elijah finally speaks up upon finding the comic he desires. Meanwhile, David and Audrey entrust Joseph to a babysitter so they can enjoy a night out together. They share drinks and attempt to reconnect, prompting David to confess that he has kept his family at a distance because something doesn't feel right. Upon returning home, the babysitter informs them that she received a phone call from New York stating that David got the job. However, he reassures her that he is not planning to leave. Additionally, Elijah leaves a message on the answering machine, explaining that every hero has a vulnerability, and David's weakness is water. Seeking answers, David sneaks out in the middle of the night to investigate the accident. He surveys the wrecked car and realizes that nobody could have survived it. This triggers the memory of the car accident, revealing that he emerged unscathed. At the same time, Audrey was trapped inside the burning vehicle. David used his strength to pry open the car door and save Audrey. Soon after, someone arrived to assist, and David realized it was unusual for him not to be injured. Overwhelmed by the memory, David calls Elijah, admitting that he never sustained an injury and seeking advice. Elijah advises him to go where there are people. Moments later, David goes to a crowded area and opens his arms as he begins purposefully investigating people's wrongdoings. He sees a woman distracting a clerk from stealing jewelry, a guy throwing a bottle at a group of black people while insulting them for their race, and a guy taking advantage of an unconscious drunk girl. When he bumps into the janitor, he discovers that the janitor killed a man to take over his house. David waits for the janitor to finish his work and follows him to the house, noticing that he enters through the back door. Following the same route, David gets inside too and discovers that the place is a mess, not to mention the owner's body is still on the stairs. Then he looks around the rooms and finds two kids tied up in a closet. David immediately frees them and asks them to be quiet. Next, David checks the main room and finds the mother tied up. As the balcony door opens, David steps through it, thinking the guy may have escaped. At that moment, the janitor appears behind David and pushes him off the balcony, causing him to fall on a wet surface. David looks around and realizes he's on a pool cover, which slowly begins to sink under his weight. Entangled in the fabric, David can't swim and keeps struggling to breathe and survive. Thankfully, a stick suddenly appears in the water, and he grabs it so he can be pulled out. It turns out the kids have come to rescue him. Afterwards, David returns to the main room and grabs the janitor from behind to choke him. The man fights back and pushes David against the wall, which causes damage on the surface. David is still stronger and manages to kill the guy in the end. Then he frees the mother, but unfortunately, she's already dead. That night, David takes Audrey from her room so they can sleep on the same bed again, and the feeling of something wrong is finally gone. The following day, Joseph sees his parents behaving very lovingly toward each other. When Audrey is distracted, David shows Joseph the newspaper with the news about the dead janitor, which includes an illustration of a mysterious vigilante. David affirms it's him and requests Joseph to keep the secret. Sometime later, David attends Elijah's art show and encounters his mother, who informs him about the two categories of antagonists: those who fight with their fists and those who fight with their intellect. The woman is familiar with David because Elijah refers to him as a friend. Subsequently, Elijah tails David to his office, where Elijah commends him on his inaugural night as a vigilante. He extends a hand for a handshake, and David makes a startling revelation when they do.
Passengers aren't allowed in there.
Everyone in that hotel will be burned alive.
Suddenly, to his shock, Elijah reveals that he has deliberately orchestrated accidents to locate a superhero for years, including the train David was on. Astonished, David surveys Elijah's blueprints and research. Elijah explains that now that David knows who he is, he also comprehends his identity, that of the antagonist to David's protagonist. As in the tales, they are diametrical opposites, yet sometimes allies. Perhaps Mr. Glass has always been Elijah's villain moniker. David promptly contacts the authorities, and Elijah is confined to a facility for the criminally insane.